No, it's the third Friday of 2024. That's better, right? And there's still like 7 more Fridays to go before we come to February. But keep hanging in there. It's okay. It's going to happen. School heads are demanding funds in full. Barely a week after 1.4 million 2023 KCPE candidates reported to secondary school principals want all money to go to them. Now, do you have money?
Some want fees in full.
Okay.
And
they're also telling the government, can you send all the money in full?
Yeah, capitation now.
Yeah. Tumesikia World Bank inatoa pesa. Can you send that money here to school? Now we have to go to the market because it's the only way. Yeah. As usual.
Thank you very much.
This is one for you.
These are 2 for me.
Yeah, one for you. The other one is for our guests.
Okay.
I'm sure he has seen kiwi.
You must have seen kiwi somewhere. It's shoe polish. I'm
actually one of the users.
Very good. Now, everybody around the world has used kiwi and we know what that's for. Obviously, you need to look spick and span and step up and shine. And now all these school fees woes, Kiwi is saying, you know what, let's see how we can make this just a little bit easier to get through this life. Go to a supermarket, a shop, wherever you will find this kiwi with the new logo. Pick up a tin of it. And under the lid is a code. We're going to dial *459 *5#, input the code, you win data or airtime instantly. The beautiful thing about this is that you also then get a chance to enter into a draw. What does this draw do? The draw is allowing 4 people, we turn the thing, and every week 4 people are winning 35,000 shillings. Maybe an even more beautiful thing, that this 35,000 shillings goes directly to school fees. So you buy shoe polish to shine your shoes and look immaculate, and then you can win school fees to go to school. It's fantastic.
Nice.
Step up and shine with
This is where school shopping earns you school fees. Very, very good. Before we welcome our guests, let's also remind you about Maramoja Taxi. Maramoja Taxi is a Kenyan taxi app, all right? And beautiful. It's available. These taxis are available in Nairobi, in Mombasa, in Nakuru, in Naivasha, Kisumu, and Eldoret. Very many taxis, thousands of them. If you just use Maramoja, you hail a taxi will come to you wherever you are. And the beautiful thing about it is you can actually choose the driver that you want to be using. That is, you can tap, you can pair with the driver that you want and go. When you hail a taxi, as City has been reminding us, you will see options of the vehicles near you and photos of the drivers plus their vehicle. And then you decide, I want to use so-and-so, okay? Because they're close to me, because whatever. Then if you like them, you can decide to be using them any other time that you want to use them. You don't actually, next time you go, you look for driver so-and-so, you tap, you pair with that driver, you go. If they're near you, if they're not near you, they'll call you and tell you this is how far I am, and you can decide to go. Very, very good thing. So download it today, Maramoja Taxi. And if you use the code SPICE30, you will get a 30% discount on your next ride. The code SPICE30. Our next guest is one who is very new to the country, and the embassy is also very new to the country, but relations between our country and this country have spanned 20 years. His Excellency Sultan Hajiyev is the ambassador, let's say it, extraordinary and plenipotentiary of the country of Azerbaijan to Kenya, and is also the permanent representative of Azerbaijan to the UN office in Nairobi. Good morning, Balozi.
Morning. Habari za asubuhi.
Salama bwana, salama sana.
Asante sana. Asante kwa maliko.
Karibu sana. That is the hot seat of Kenya's biggest conversation, the Situation Room. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
How long have you been in the country?
Almost 6 months.
Hiyo ni miezi ngapi? Miezi sita? We call it miezi sita.
Miezi sita.
Yeah.
6 months.
6 months. Oh, yeah.
Sita is 6.
Right, very true. Sita.
6 months.
Yes.
Okay. And when did the embassy open in Nairobi?
Well, we started functioning last summer. We're currently working on our move to the permanent
The whole
location.
of last year was last summer for Kenya. So
Okay, well, that's a very fair point, but I think it's your huge advantage, by the way, because whenever you're talking to people about weather, it's really difficult to understand which season are you in. When I'm seeing some of my Kenyan friends bundling up early in the morning saying it's cold, I'm saying where? I mean, what's cold? So going back to the embassy, as you've rightly mentioned, we have a long and successful history of relations between Kenya and Azerbaijan. We'll be celebrating the 20th anniversary of establishing diplomatic relations later this year. But when it comes to the embassy of Azerbaijan operating in Nairobi, we started last July. And of course, just opening the embassy, your first months are going to be taken primarily with some of the administrative organizational issues. But at the same time, we've been able to advance a bit on bilateral relations agenda as well.
Okay. We'll be wanting to understand where Azerbaijan is in the world. Is it in South America? Is it in the Alps?
Is it in the Middle East?
Is it in the Middle East? Is it in okay. But to welcome you to the conversation, CT has the day's proverb. Every week, CT goes to one African country. He mines proverbs from that country. Well, he doesn't physically go, but sometimes he does. Mines proverbs from that country and then brings us one proverb a day for the week. This week, he's been in Nigeria.
Okay.
And he's been giving us proverbs in Pigeon English. He reads it, she gives it to us in proper Pigeon, and then we ask our guests to try and translate it from Pigeon English to English. Let's see if you can get it, and if you don't, it's okay. She'll help you.
Let's try.
CT, let's start with CT Pigeon.
Yes, let me massacre this pigeon. No matter how tall okra grow, he no go tall past owner.
Why do you sing it?
Because it makes me happy.
And today he's like this. So again, go again.
No matter how tall okra grow, he no go tall past owner.
So in Pigeon, it's no matter how tall okra they grow, it no go grow tall passing owner.
Okay.
Passing owner.
Passing owner.
I should have given up right away. Because of course,
From the very beginning, from no matter.
just to cut the chase, basically.
Okay, in English.
No matter how tall okra grows, it will not grow taller than its owner.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, I mean...
Ambassador, you know what okra is?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So now, what do you understand from that?
I think it requires a bit of profound, deep thinking and analysis. I prefer sharing it with you at a later stage, if you don't mind.
This is a very diplomatic answer. No. It has to be now. Spur of the moment. How
Well,
does
I
it
mean,
speak to
Your thoughts?
in my humble opinion,
Yes.
it's basically when someone is starting something. I mean, when someone is really initiating some kind of the process. I mean, then most likely his investment or his role in that process will remain dominating, no matter how much or how hard those supporting or following his steps are going to basically try to deliver. Maybe I'm off the mark, but that's my reading,
That's
basically.
deep.
No, you're not off the mark at all.
Okay, well, thank you. Glad to hear that.
No. See, the beauty of an interpretation and why we ask of it, because we want to hear someone's take on it. So it can't possibly be wrong. That's your take.
Yeah, thanks very much.
And it's a good one. It makes sense.
Right.
It makes a lot of sense. It does make a lot of sense. So, Your Excellency Sultan, where is Azerbaijan
Okay. We are in a very interesting neighborhood. We're next to Turkey, which is our traditional ally. We're next to Iran, Russia. We're one of the 5 countries with access to the Caspian Sea. Azerbaijan used to be part of the country known as Soviet Union, which collapsed in early 90s. And voila, that's where we are, basically.
So you're in Asia.
Well, it's a crossroads, and
Europe.
it's an interesting
Somewhere.
opportunity to position ourselves partially as Europeans, partially as Asians, subject to issues in discussion. And I mean, if you look at international organizations, and some of them, Azerbaijan is covered by Asian bureaus, units, and departments, and some of them, we are basically part of the European groups. But our ties and our partnerships are of equal importance both in Europe and Asia, and we see it as a major advantage, and we try to benefit from it economically, culturally, I mean, in every possible way.
Okay. What's a political system? Are you a monarchy, a democracy? Or?
No, well, it's a presidential republic. And speaking of our political system, we'll be having elections next month. The country is stable. Starting 1994, Azerbaijan has embarked on a path of development. That was when our national leader, Heydar Aliyev, came to power. He was in charge of the country for quite a number of years when it was part of the Soviet Union. Then he left because basically because of some political changes, he left. And when he returned to Baku in 1994, Azerbaijan was on the brink of collapse. We have been defeated militarily. The economy collapsed completely. The crime rate was totally despicable. So this was the most difficult, I would even say, tragic situation for the country. But his wisdom and his experience has managed to bring Azerbaijan back on the path of development. He stabilized the country. We signed what was known and is still known as the contract of the century, which has laid foundation for Azerbaijan's economic development. We are oil and gas rich country. And quite a number of major decisions were made which have laid foundation of Azerbaijan as an independent state. And that's what we're benefiting from now. The country is currently ruled by President Ilham Aliyev. He is son of Heydar Aliyev, but it's not a monarchy, as you've asked.
He was elected.
He was elected, and frankly speaking, being Azerbaijani citizen, I have a little doubt that he will be re-elected next February, because his positions were traditionally strong. But in 2020, under his leadership, Azerbaijan accomplished something that many thought is impossible. We've liberated our territories that remained under occupation by the neighboring Armenia by some 30 years. We're dynamically developing countries that is looking for peaceful partnership and cooperation with all the neighbors, including Armenia. However, that dark page is part of our history. For 30 years, 20% of the territory of my country was under occupation, as confirmed by 4 UN Security Council resolutions. There are internationally recognized borders of Azerbaijan, and 20% of those territories were beyond our control. The specific significance of elections next year is also partially because for the first time in our history, they will be taking place in the whole country. However, as I mentioned, we really hope that we're leaving behind that page of hatred and animosity. There is a lot for all of us to win from peace and partnership, and this is the policy of Azerbaijan's leadership. So we are very much optimistic looking into the future. Of course, there are some barriers, some hurdles. 30 years of most difficult relations cannot be erased overnight. However, we see some encouraging signs, and I think that our international partners are also very much in favor of those dynamics.
As you look at independent states, a lot of times you look at the conflicts that they have with other states, and unfortunately we have to sometimes look at the country through that lens in order to then understand where that particular country sits in the geopolitical space. What's Azerbaijan's current relationship with Armenia, and looking into how now you spread with these conversations around the world?
Well, as I mentioned, there is ongoing effort for the comprehensive peace agreement. There have been some very encouraging signs, because as difficult as relations are, we've made some progress, which is also recognized by our international partners. My government has repeatedly confirmed the strongest possible commitment to peace, partnership in the best interest of the entire region. I will be probably again repeating myself, but there are still some obstacles, because at this stage we are rather determined to make sure that the conflict is an issue of the past, and we wouldn't want the military conflict, as big as the role that it plays in our recent history, to define Azerbaijan, or to basically be associated with what Azerbaijan is. We are a peaceful country. The only thing that we accomplished in 2020 and then in 2023, but that was only one-day special operation. We just restored our territorial integrity. And as of 2020, Azerbaijan embarked on a major reconstruction rehabilitation program to rebuild what was destroyed completely, because those territories that I was mentioning were turned into desolation. These were nothing but minefields. Some of them still are. I mean, this is not something that I'm saying. This is something that is easily verifiable. There are many things on YouTube that you can just go and see what's left of what used to be vibrant and densely populated territories where Azerbaijanis and Armenians lived peacefully before the end of 80s, when our neighbors decided that they want to claim that land. And it must first, the idea was that it will become part of Armenia, then they claimed to be independent. Not a single country in the world has recognized independence of that self-proclaimed republic, including Armenia itself. Even so, it supported it, it protected it. And for 27 years, we tried. We asked, we pleaded, we tried to convince that this is not a way forward. We were offering all the compromises possible. Unfortunately, our neighbors have chosen to be non-receptive. And that was the reason events started in 2020. But again, I mean, looking into the future, one thing that we would want to do, we want to leave this page behind, because we don't want to leave our next generation with this imminent threat of facing a military conflict again.
What are the cultural ties between the people who live in those regions, between Armenian and Azerbaijani culture?
Well, Armenia and Azerbaijan are two very different countries with different histories. I mean, but as different as we are and always were, this was never an issue, because when I was growing up until the time that the conflict started, we were getting along with our Armenian friends perfectly well. I mean, even at school, I had a number of Armenian schoolmates. There were no issues between Azerbaijanis and Armenians. I mean, there were issues once in a while, but just like there are issues between Azerbaijanis and Azerbaijanis, or Armenians and Armenians. So the issue of ethnic belonging was not really known, because Azerbaijan was and remains a very tolerant country. There are representatives of different ethnic groups, of different religions, I mean, coexisting, I mean, living peacefully. And this was never an issue. However, when we faced that very challenge, which I was mentioning, we're completely unprepared. It happened at the time the Soviet Union started kind of trembling and shaking. And this has separated us big times. But we all know that no matter how deep the wounds are and how bitter the relations, I mean, could turn, how sour they can turn. One good thing about human beings, about human nature, is that people are able to reconcile. I'm pretty sure that Azerbaijanis and Armenians, if given a chance, can do the same.
You know, in every country along the borders, you'll find people from one side of the border who have ethnic ties to those on there across the border. It's just that they're in different countries.
Very true.
So in this particular territory, do these people who live here have ties ethnically with those in Armenia and those in Azerbaijan? And according to even their own argument, what's their argument? Do they feel closer to Armenia or closer to Azerbaijan?
Well, I mean, the territory where the conflict started, called Karabakh, is a territory that was populated both by Armenians and by Azerbaijanis. It was not even neighboring Armenia. It was after the conflict in the 90s and after military aggression that this territory, this area, Karabakh, and 5 adjacent regions were occupied by the Armenian military forces, and the 4 UN Security Council resolutions that I referred to are very clearly demanding immediate withdrawal of Armenian troops from the territory of Azerbaijan. Armenia has chosen to remain deaf and to ignore those resolutions for a number of years. Whenever I'm talking to my Armenian partners, I'm asking them this very basic question, and there is no answer. And other questions that I'm trying to ask whenever I'm being invited to discuss this very issue is that, look, imagine you're living in an apartment and it consists of, say, 7 rooms or 5 rooms. And one day your neighbor comes and says, okay, is this your apartment? Yes. Do you have all the papers? Yes, I do. This is a part of my internationally recognized territory. But you know what? In 2 of these rooms, my ancestors lived like 10,000 years or 2,000 years ago. So why don't you get out? You know, I mean, first of all, I'm going to argue whether your ancestors lived here or not. But let's put it aside for a second. Let's imagine that they did. Does it mean that I have to leave? 1 million people became refugees in my country in early 90s because of the conflict. 1 million out of 9.5 million population of the country. As I mentioned, that was at the time the Soviet Union just collapsed. We were a newly independent country with super weak economy, with some major internal issues, and that was a major burden that, of course, claimed a major toll on the development of Azerbaijan, as well as the entire region. Looking back, the thing is that, of course, we lost a lot. I don't think our Armenian neighbors gained anything from that conflict, particularly now that they lost territories that they occupied by force and controlled for 27 plus years.
Okay. So looking at those areas where obviously because of proximity you deal with some of those conflicts, and then now looking at where you're looking outside of that region, Kenya, for example, and then folks start to ask the questions of the relevance of a relationship between Azerbaijan and Kenya. What would fuel that, and what would be the need to then have relationship, diplomatically or otherwise, trade-wise, with Kenya?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think we all know that we live in an intertwined and interconnected world. I mean, as distant and as remote as countries can be from each other geographically, if we look at it as a part of a global system, one cannot exist without the other, whether it sees those links or they're hidden. There are certain issues where Kenya and Azerbaijan are naturally partnering on, working on together. There are some issues where it's done in a planned manner. There are some agenda items, like, for example, climate change, where those connections are not necessarily at your table or at the top of your priorities at all times, but this way or the other, you are part of the global process. It's the same when it comes to economy. I mean, it's very interesting that you asked this question, because as I was getting ready to my deployment, some of my friends, some of my colleagues back in Baku, in our capital, they were saying, okay, you're going to Kenya, so what do we have between Azerbaijan and Kenya right now? What's there? And I was like, not much, but this has to change. The whole idea, the whole purpose is that we want to strengthen relations which are in the best interest of both nations. I mean, this is something that is in the best interest of Azerbaijan and Azerbaijanis, but also of Kenya and Kenyans, and that comes to supporting each other on some global political agenda items, again, in line with national interest of two countries, but also it must be finding its reflection in some of the business and economic ties, because people have a lot to benefit from working with each other, trading with each other. There are some major fursa that we can easily see here in terms of opportunities and strengthening relations between the countries. I mean, there are some basic things like, I don't know, Kenyan tea, Kenyan coffee, tourism. This is one thing which is like a low-hanging fruit. It's there, it's writing on the wall. I mean, well, Azerbaijan, as I mentioned, is a country with traditional experience in oil and gas. We also have some tourism opportunities. We're doing really well in agriculture. We have interesting ICT solutions. I mean, speaking of tourism, one of the reasons Azerbaijan is known in Kenya. Well, let me put it this way. Whoever knows Azerbaijan in Kenya knows it because of Formula One, which is one of the testaments to our success in becoming a well-developed tourist destination and also being able to host an event like this. Because when we look back at the challenges that we were facing 30 years ago, for example, I mean, I can tell you today's basically 20th of January, which is more or less where we are right now, which is tomorrow, is a rather dark date in the history of my country, because during our struggle for independence from Soviet Union, on this very date in 1990, Soviet Union sent troops to Baku, slaughtering innocent civilians. Tanks marched through the streets of Baku, leaving hundreds of innocent civilians killed. We didn't have an army at that time. We were part of the Soviet Union. There was no army to challenge or to resist troops sent by Moscow. However, it's a dark page, and should it be the case that someone was telling me that those very streets that tanks were going through 30 plus years ago will become the city circuit for Formula One, I would have been asking this person what did he have for breakfast, and telling him not to eat the same thing ever again. It's really interesting, but it's possible. Well, impossible is really nothing. So
a lot has changed in your country over those years.
Yeah, no,
I mean,
absolutely.
In a few
absolutely.
short years comparatively. You look at the pictures of Azerbaijan before that independence and the pictures of Azerbaijan today.
Very true.
What we see on Formula One when you're watching the Baku race, and you're like, okay, what country is this? Our guest is His Excellency Sultan Hajiyev. He is the ambassador of Azerbaijan to Kenya, also representing Azerbaijan at the UN office in Nairobi. We want to look at 20 years of diplomatic relations between Azerbaijan and Kenya. They formally established the embassy last year, sent the first ambassador to the country last year. He's sitting here with us today. You're a wealthy country. Like you told us, you've got gas and oil resources and quite vast. They're actually fueling the economy. Tell us about that.
Well, that's an interesting way to put it, wealthy country. As I mentioned, Azerbaijan is oil and gas rich country, and I think one of the major achievements of my government, of my leadership, is ability to turn those natural resources into real development, into the progress that can be seen. No country is immune to difficulties. I mean, we have our share of trouble, just like any other country on earth, including those most advanced, most developed. However, the path we have chosen of turning our natural resources into welfare for ordinary citizens has brought results desired, and even so, it's a continuum. Of course, no one can say, well, it's done, mission accomplished. But all in all, I believe we have a lot to be proud of. I mean, from some of the things that are easily noticeable that you were mentioning, that when you look at the streets of Baku, including for some of the YouTube videos, or when you're looking at some of those CNN commercials, I mean, you see that development. And people who travel to Baku are always impressed. I mean, and for understandable reasons. Speaking about our wealth, one of the reflections or one of the key examples that I can refer to, that in rebuilding the territories that we liberated, Azerbaijan is using its resources and its resources alone. Almost 100% of $13.5 billion US programs that we're implementing in those territories is funded by the government of Azerbaijan. 7 billion have been delivered already, and this doesn't include almost $500 million that we have invested and are investing in demining, because as I was mentioning earlier, those territories are heavily contaminated. One of the key priorities, as much as oil and gas is good for development, but it's really crucially important to diversify, because dependence on oil and gas economy is something potentially dangerous unless you start investing the benefits early enough to try to get yourself ready for an alternative scenario. I mean, the time will come imminently when you'll be facing some challenges. It's not just me as ambassador of my country speaking, but if you look at some of the rankings in terms of my country's economic indicators, it is quite quite impressive. I mean, let me limit myself to simply mentioning the State Oil Fund of Azerbaijan, which is a sovereign fund basically managing the wealth of the country, has $55 billion in assets. And this is nothing to do with the state budget directly. This is just a separate line. This was a decision made by the national leader in early years of independence that income will be managed in a very particular way, as this institution won some international awards in terms of utilization of resources, and this is an interesting experience which we are taking pride in.
Okay, so 20 years of relations with Kenya, give or take, but then only last year the establishment of an embassy and all the required protocol, I assume. Why did it take that long, and then what is hopeful to achieve with this?
Well, let me put it this way. In the early years of independence, let's call cat a cat. I mean, basically, we did have our hands full. I mean, there was no clear understanding of importance. Not just Kenya, I think Africa as a continent. It came in time, and I think it's not the case with my country only, but quite a number of countries in other parts of the world have realized or have arrived to the understanding of the growing importance of Africa in the last years, basically, in the last couple of decades. Then when the understanding of importance came, there was an issue of resources, because despite being rich in oil and gas, I mean, it's not just turning switch on and then cashing your chips, basically. It's a process, it's a continuum. So even when we realized how strategically important partnership with this part of the world is, I mean, there were no resources immediately available for this particular destination. Then we've arrived at the stage when both were in place, both understanding as well as resources, and that basically triggered decision of the political leadership of the country to go ahead with establishing the embassy in Nairobi.
What I have been interested in finding out is, given your unique location, you're bang in the middle of the eastern part of Europe, western part of Asia, do you as a country belong to an economic bloc?
Well, speaking of our memberships, Azerbaijan is an active member of the non-aligned movement. Actually, as we speak here today, there is a high-level forum in Kampala in Uganda, and during that forum, Azerbaijan will be passing the chairmanship of the non-aligned movement to Uganda, because we were chairing the non-aligned movement for the last 2 years, and we did our one-year term, but then because of the results produced, we've been asked to do one more year. Azerbaijan was very active, and one of the important elements of the non-chairmanship has a direct link to our relations with Kenya, because it was during the non-aligned movement COVID summit that His Excellency Prime Cabinet Secretary Mudavadi visited Azerbaijan, and I think this is the highest level visit by the Kenyan official to Azerbaijan so far. We do hope that the number of such visits will be growing. They have grown already, of course not at this level of seniority yet, but there are some important bilateral visits planned for the coming months. And then you have already rightly mentioned the COP, the Conference of Parties, which is a climate change, and but that's a slightly different agenda item. So going back to our membership in economic blocs, let me also mention active role Azerbaijan is playing in the organization of the Turkic states, but otherwise we are more of a neutral country. I mean, we don't belong to other types of blocs, let's put it this way.
Yeah, I always find it interesting. I mean, the headquarters of the non-aligned movement is Indonesia. And I'm thinking, interesting though, but is it really possible for a country to be non-aligned?
Well, it depends what you call being non-aligned, right? I mean, it's just the same with neutrality. Whenever a person says I'm neutral, there is no absolute neutrality. I mean, so I believe, well, even so, it's less than perfect comparison. The same pretty much applies to the states, even the embodiments of neutrality. And I don't want to mention any country in particular. If you go a little deeper, there are some ties, there are some natural interest, financial interest, economic partnerships, preferences and inclinations. But all in all, when the key line is defined as those of non-alignment,
Yes.
neutrality that I think helps a lot. And non-aligned movement is a very potent institution. It's second to United Nations only in terms of the number of members. And I think it's becoming more and more active. And during Azerbaijan's chairmanship, quite a number of new avenues have been activated. There is, for example, parliamentary network of the non-aligned movements that was introduced under Azerbaijan's sponsored initiatives. There is the youth-based network of the non-aligned movement. One of the big events that took place in Azerbaijan last year was a gender conference of non-aligned movement countries, by the way, attended by Principal Secretary of your gender ministry, of the ministry, Principal Secretary for Gender and Affirmative Action by Madam Van Gombe. So, that's how that's all about neutrality.
You see why I ask is, when you compare to the United Nations, we see the clout the United Nations has. You, non-aligned movement, what, 120 members?
No, it's more. 120, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yes,
I thought
exactly.
you said 20, yeah.
No, 120. So, it's a like membership. We see the clout that the UN has. Surely, the non-aligned movement ought to have, should you say, beyond the conferences that they hold, what would you say is the impact that they've had on this planet vis-a-vis some of the parts of this globe where there are warring nations, problems with neighbors?
It's interesting that you mention United Nations, because while I'm currently representing my country to United Nations here in Nairobi, I also spent quite a number of years working for United Nations myself. I'm a former UN official. When it comes to UN and non-aligned movement, one thing in my view is very clear, is that these are no competitors, because the function and institutions are very, very different. When it comes to what non-aligned movement can do, I think one requires to look back at the history and at the first years of existence and see where the non-aligned movement is now, to realize the potential in full. I think there are a lot of opportunities that are yet to be harnessed. I think some of them have been actively engaged on or have been brought in action. But whenever we're looking at the new sector or at the new area of interest for non-aligned movement, we need to factor in importance of coordination, because we're not creating any kind of alternative. And saying we, I'm not speaking about Azerbaijan only, but we're talking about the organization as such. There are many institutions in the world, and each of them have a role to play. I mean, it's just a question whether they are willing and doing so, and in doing so, if they are coordinating with other partners. I think non-aligned movement does that in an exemplary manner.
What are you hoping what is the country's hope that will happen in terms of relationship with Kenya over the next however long?
Well, I mean, I think I've partially touched upon those issues previously. I mean, there is a global agenda, and I do believe that both countries can benefit from strengthening ties and looking at closer cooperation, partnership options. I've mentioned already more than once even the issue of climate change. And the African Climate Summit that Kenya has very successfully organized and implemented, attended by some highest level representatives from many, many countries, is a clear testament of one of the leading roles that your country is playing in this part of the world. Azerbaijan, which is traditionally committed to environmental protection and other related issues, is now also has a bit of a special role because of hosting the 2024 Conference of Parties. So that's one kind of most immediately available go-to examples of partnership and cooperation. But there is so much more, basically. I just don't want to bore our listeners going through some of the areas that we are exploring. I've mentioned some of the traditional areas of interest, and let me say fortes of my country. When it comes to Kenya, I'm sure you know them so well when you look at your basically just to look outside. I mean, your wildlife, for example, tourism is one thing that we can immediately look at, and there are many other issues, there are many other opportunities. I think that what's really important is a good traction and chemistry and commitment of the leadership, and I do believe that this is the case. There are many very positive signals which are making me personally very optimistic that these relations can grow. And as I mentioned, one important precondition for these relations to grow is that they must be in the best interest of people of both countries. Should be mutually useful and mutually beneficial partnership.
Are Azerbaijani companies venturing outside of Azerbaijan and investing in other countries? And is one of your KPIs marketing Kenya to the Azerbaijani companies for investment?
Yes, of course. As I've already mentioned, one of the key indicators of success, along with senior level engagements, top level meetings, and assurances of mutual support, is actually economic ties. I mean, that's what you refer to when saying money talks, basically. I think it's of crucial importance to make sure that Azerbaijani business, which is quite active globally, because of the reasons mentioned earlier, there are some resources that we can use in this regard. I think it's really important that it discovers Kenya, because we're looking at new investment opportunities, and I really like the slogan of your national air carrier, the pride of Africa. I really think Kenyans have a lot to be proud of, and one of the areas that is, in my view, fueling this pride is many investment opportunities that your country has. It's only a question of really exploring, of putting the right people together and encouraging this kind of partnership.
So what kind of companies would be investing in Kenya? I'm just thinking, I mean, in what areas do you see, for example, Azerbaijani companies coming to set up business here, operating from Kenya?
Well, I can refer to the areas of our traditional strengths. I'm not going to talk about oil and gas because we've covered it quite a bit. Let me mention something about oil and gas still, which I think could be of interest because very few people in this part of the world probably know about it. Everybody heard about the Nobel Peace Prize, but very few people know that the Nobel family made their initial fortune in Azerbaijan at the end of 90s, beginning of 20th century. If you Google, you will find the Nobel family house museum in Baku, which is something of sentimental value for nobles. And just basically mentioning this as an interesting example of a long history of Azerbaijan's active engagement on oil and gas. Speaking of other areas, construction is one area that we're traditionally very active in. Azerbaijani construction companies are operating in a number of countries of the world. We have quite a number of very strong IT companies active in e-governance, offering their solutions and engaging with a number of countries abroad. Well, I mentioned trade. There are some basic trade operations, I mean, from some low-level trade-related issues that can be there. There are touristic companies. Well, it's tourism. Whenever I was talking to my friends back in Baku, talking about beauties of Kenya, explaining how Marindadi with Rainbow, right? How beautiful Kenya is. They were like, well, but we don't feel like spending like $25,000 for 5 days. And I'm like, who told you need to spend $25,000 for 5 days? I said, of course, if you want to, you can spend $250, no limit. But in principle, I mean, including the cost of travel, you can come and enjoy one of the best wildlife tourism destinations, and it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. So, I mean, it's all about connecting the dots. I'm pretty convinced that if we bring like 25 to 30 business people from Kenya and the same number of business guys from my country, and you just clear the room yourself, you just go and you come back in few hours. They will already have something, I mean, at the tables. They will be already discussing the cost of transportation. And some people are saying it's too far away. No, it's not too far away. We know that today, in today's world, nothing is too far away.
How many other countries on the continent of Africa do you have embassies?
Well, we only have one in Addis, and we have presence in South Africa. Well, speaking of African continent, of course, we do have embassy in Morocco. We do have embassy in Algeria.
Okay. So meaning that given your position, how many other countries do you cover?
Well, as I was discussing this issue with my senior colleagues back in Baku, and they were asking the same question, I was telling them, let me start by covering Nairobi. because, just having arrived to the country and trying to trying to bite more than I can chew. But I do expect to cover some more countries, and I have to say that I'm already in touch, even not having a very clearly defined official function. But since I'm here, quite a number of potential counterparts or active counterparts from other countries in the region or in Africa in general are reaching out as they have some questions, and it's easy for them to talk to me here rather than talking to my capital all the time.
You'll be hosting COP29 this year. COP28 saw very many things happening. I mean, African countries came together first in the Africa Climate Summit and came to Dubai with one voice. But one of those voices that was also emerging out of COP28 as very controversial was the proposal, which was termed as preposterous by some, to have a conversation about end of fossil fuels. Where did your country stand, and where does it stand on that particular matter?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you refer to this proposal being preposterous. I'm not going to label it in any way. COP is a big event, and I don't have to talk about the importance of COP, which is something that is long known as one of the top opportunities for the entire world to discuss climate change agenda. Azerbaijan is currently working on its agenda both as a host country as well as one of the members of the international community. One thing I can tell you right away is that for my country, successful COP29 is one of the top priorities, as clearly communicated by my head of state. There is a special commission established at the highest possible level, and all the resources will be mobilized, and we look forward to work with our counterparts, all of them internationally, in ensuring success of the exercise. I don't think I am currently able to offer my country's position on the specific questions that you have asked, because it's something for experts to deal with. I mean, something for people with clear mandate in this area. But speaking of it from my personal point of view, I can say is that this discussion will be getting more traction this way or the other because of one fundamental truth, which is undeniable. The time will come when these resources will run out anyway. I mean, we all know, and you don't have to be like a rocket scientist or oil and gas scientist to say that at some stage all the resources all over the globe will be running really, really thin. So, I mean, whether it makes sense to start getting ready or doing it today, well, I personally don't think so. Whether we must think about it, we totally should. But again, let me underline, it's just my personal opinion, and I'm not in a position to comment on it on behalf of my government.
Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for shedding light on your country and now these relations that we have between Kenya and Azerbaijan. We'll be inviting you again and again ahead of COP29 and also to talk about very many other relations between Kenya and Azerbaijan.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Asante sana. Now shukuru. I'll finish. I'll probably wrap up by saying tuanana badai, even so it's not an immediate badai. Something a bit later on. But really appreciate this opportunity, and let me just say once again how much I enjoy being here in Nairobi, and I really appreciate the opportunity to contribute to strengthening relations. I mean, how to say, usiano katia inchazetu, so basically, thank you so very much, and I'm wishing you a weekend in Jema, and enjoy your Friday. Thank you so very much for having me today.
The Ambassador of Azerbaijan to Kenya, Sultan Hajiyev.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.